Alrighty, well, it's 7:30 and no one's here, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and live stream it, and hopefully the sound quality and everything else is good, and we'll go from there. Matter of fact, I'm going to check it on my phone real quick and see what's going on there. So, give me 1 second, bear with me. For those of you watching it later, I want to see where we're at here. Sorry, and no one's here. Looks like we're doing good. Sounds good. So, Joshua this week, and we're going to be talking about mostly the conquering of the land of Canaan. It's going to be a shorter lesson, not just because I'm the only one here and there's not going to be anyone asking questions, but just because there's really not a whole lot to cover. You know, the book talks a lot about um, going into the various cities and things happening, and sometimes God was with them, and sometimes He wasn't, and then it tells us why He wasn't. And then the last half is basically talking about dividing up the land the way that Moses had kind of planned it out earlier before he died, obviously, and going from there. Um, there is one story I think that I didn't mention in here. I might mention it in passing um, later on. But for now, let us move on. So we're going to do some introductions first. Wrong way. The book of Joshua is presumably written by Joshua. Again, conservative versus liberal scholarship. And it is about the conquest of the land of Canaan and dividing it up. Then the book of Judges comes after that, and it is believed, and it's in the Talmud, the Jewish book, that Samuel the prophet wrote Judges, as well as 1st and 2nd Samuel. The events described in the book take place after the conquest and before Samuel anoints Saul as king. Um, there are still lands and peoples that need to be conquered in the time of the judges. You know, so Joshua didn't get the whole thing done. Um, just it takes time. So, and basically in Judges we have the Israelites turning from God because you know they're safe. They don't really feel the need to need Him, I guess. And then they start being oppressed by their neighbors, and then God raises up someone from among the Israelites who delivers Israel from their neighbors, and then they spend the rest of their days as a judge in Israel. You know, someone who makes decisions, who um, figures out disputes. You know, who's going to get what, um, and then Israel turns back for a while, but then they turn away again, and the whole process starts all over. Then we have the book of Ruth, which focuses on a specific Israelite family, and it's a book that strongly portrays the kinsman redeemer aspect, which is that, um, well, in this particular case, we have Naomi, who was an Israelite. Her husband and her sons pick up and leave and go to Midian, I believe it was, and their two sons marry some Midianite women. One of them was named Ruth, the other was named Orpah, not Oprah, but Orpah. And then Naomi's husband and both her sons die. I forget exactly what the circumstances were with that, but the book of Ruth is only 4 chapters long, and of course each chapter is less than a page, so it wouldn't be that difficult for you to read it in say 20 minutes or maybe even faster if you're a fast reader. And so Naomi goes back to Israel because she's a widow, her family should be taking care of her, and her family is in Israel. You know, her sons aren't left. Well, Ruth and Orpah follow Naomi back for a while, but then Naomi says to them, you know, I don't have anyone for you to marry, and it's going to be a long time before I have children. And even if I did have children now, you'd have to wait, you know, a couple decades before you could marry them. And so she tells them, go back and be with your families and find someone else to marry. Well, Orpah goes back, but Ruth says, no, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to follow your God, and we'll go from there. And so they go back, and ultimately, um, someone from Naomi's family, the I think her uncle or great uncle or something along those lines, ends up taking care of her and Ruth, and then marries Ruth. And as you can see in the slide there, Boaz is the great grandfather of King David, which we see in the genealogy in Luke chapter 3, verses 31 to 32. And since Ruth married Boaz, she is the the great grandmother of David. So why did God have all the Canaanite peoples killed or driven out? Um, this is something that I've heard skeptics, atheists, non-believers bring this topic up in in regards to why they don't believe in Christianity, or why the God of the Old Testament, at least if not the entire Bible, is just some maniacal, arbitrary, mean deity, and it's really not. They take a very surface, no, not even a surface level reading. They just remember, oh yeah, God had the Israelites wipe out the Canaanites, so he's a bully. But if you read it, it gives us the reason why. It's not because of the promise he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's a small part of it, but that's not why. Um, if That's not why he had him killed, I'll put it that way. He still would have had the Israelites um, gain the land of Canaan somehow, but there wouldn't have been as much bloodshed, if any. I'm not sure how they would have done it peacefully, but that doesn't matter. That's a hypothetical. The main thing is, it's not just because of the promise. It's also not because Israel was his chosen people and the Canaanites weren't. For anyone who wants to say, oh, God is a racist, he's not. You know, um, yes, Israel were his chosen people, but anyone could become a religious Israelite. And that's the whole thing about Christianity, is anybody can be saved. There's no such thing as a Jew or a Gentile. Male and female doesn't matter. Not that we can choose who we want to be, but all these other things. The gospel's for everybody, not any race, and this is no different. It's also not because of their skin color, again, with the race. It was, however, because of their wickedness, their child sacrifices, the rampant sexual immorality, which was in worship to false gods, and various other things that were going on. The child sacrifice is the one that really gets me. It disturbs me to no end when I think about it, and I don't want to describe it right now in the video. I don't know who's going to be watching it, but if you look up um, child sacrifice and Canaanites and Molech, you can see what was going on there. The whole point of what I've just said is that it wasn't an arbitrary decision, despite what other people say. It wasn't just God being a bully. He gave them time, about 400 years before he brought Israel out of Egypt and had them take over the land of Canaan. So we get to the crossing of the Jordan. Now, the Israelites had conquered some of the peoples over on the eastern part, the eastern side of Georgia, of the Jordan River, and 2.5 of the tribes decided they wanted to stay over there. And we'll see a map here in a little bit about which tribes got which lands. But then the Israelites finally get to cross over the Jordan River. Now, before they did this, of course, they sent some spies into the land, specifically to Jericho, which is probably the most famous of all the stories of Israel conquering Canaan. It's also the first story of them conquering. So, like I said, Joshua sent a couple spies in. They run into Rahab, who has an inn. She's an innkeeper, possibly a prostitute. There's some debate about that. But she brings in the spies, and she tells them the story about how everyone's heard what Yahweh is doing for them, and and everyone's afraid of them, and she's going to help them, but she wants some guarantees in return. She doesn't want her household to be wiped out when they come. And the spies, tell her, when we leave, which they're getting ready to leave, put this red cord out your window, and as long as whoever is in your household is actually in your house, they'll be spared. If they leave the house, our hands are clean. And Rahab agrees to this. So the spies get lowered out the window. Her house is on the wall. It's actually part of the wall of Jericho. So they get lowered out the window and they go this way. Rahab tells the guards that they went that way. Kind of a misdirection. Then the spies eventually get back to Joshua. I think it took them about 3 days, just to hide and make sure that the guards weren't looking for him anymore and that kind of thing. And they tell him, the people are afraid of us and we're good to go. So Israel and Joshua, they all get up and get ready to cross the Jordan, and they have to do it in a specific way. The priests will carry the Ark of the Covenant in front of everybody, and they're supposed to stay 2,000 cubits back, which is about 3,000 feet. Um, if you remember the talk about how big a cubit is, it's from the tip of the elbow to the tip of the finger, about 18 inches, depending on who you are, how tall you are, etc. I think 1.5 feet is a good estimate, and it's easy math too, for the most part, anyway. But so what happens is when the priests start to walk, they put their feet in the Jordan, and then a little ways up, because the river's flowing down, so a little ways up the river, the water stops, and then the rest of the water goes on down, and Israel gets to cross on dry ground. Now, the other kings hear about it, and they get a little worried. After they did cross, God told Joshua to get some flint knives and circumcise the men, because no one that had been born in the wilderness had been circumcised. Those who left Egypt had been, but not those who had been born in the wilderness. I can only imagine how painful that would have been at that age. Luckily, yeah, never mind. But so they do that. Now, when they go to Jericho, the fighting men were to march around the walls of Jericho once a day, every day for 6 days. And the priests, of course, would be in front with the Ark of the Covenant. And there were some other priests that had ram's horns, and they were blowing the horns as they were marching around. But everyone else, all the fighting men, were to be silent, just the sound of their marching, and, possibly some clanking from moving around with whatever they had, spears, shields, whatever. But they weren't to say anything, they weren't to yell, nothing. Then on the seventh day, which kind of funny how God said you're going to rest on the Sabbath, but in this particular instance, they're not resting on the Sabbath. Anyway, on the seventh day, they actually march around Jericho 7 times. That's what God told them to do. And then after the 7th time, Joshua would give a signal, and everyone would shout as loud as possible. The ram's horns would be blown, and a whole bunch of other noise. And then the walls of Jericho come tumbling down. Now, yes, this sounds fanciful and like a miracle, but you have to remember we're dealing with God, a supernatural being, and He created all the laws of physics that we know of, any laws of physics that we might not know of, anything and everything that we know of, and anything and everything that might be out there that we don't know of, He created. And so if He wants to have Israel do this and then tells the walls to fall down, well, they're going to fall down. And I guess maybe not telling the walls to fall would be that He willed them to fall down. Now, of course, Rahab's house was on the wall, right? But everyone's supposed to be protected, right? Well, as you can kind of see in this picture, Rahab's house was still standing. Now, we have found the walls of Jericho, I believe. I was just looking into it. There are some people claiming that there's a section of the wall that's still standing that was probably Rahab's house. It's an interesting thought. It may be true, it may not be true. Again, take it with a grain of salt. Pray to God for discernment. I haven't decided one way or the other on this yet, but it wouldn't surprise me. Although it would have been 3,000 years ago, give or take, a couple hundred years. Yeah, probably would have been about 1300. No, let's see, between 1350 and 1400 BC, because the Exodus took place in about 1440. They marched around for 40 years. So, yeah, a little after 14, or yeah, a little after 1400 BC, and we're in the year 2000 now, so about 3,500 years. So even if Rahab's house was still standing, which obviously I believe it was immediately after, it may not be now. Just due to weather, and who knows if there's earthquakes and whatnot out there as well. But anyway, Rahab and her family did do what they were told. She hung the scarlet robe out the window, and they were safe. Anyone who stayed in the house was safe. And you know, the reason why she was able to, why? Oh, no, that hasn't come up yet. Yeah, she actually is in the genealogical line of Jesus. I forget exactly where in the New Testament it says that, and there is some debate. It may not be the same Rahab because of a difference in spelling. You know, I do believe in inerrancy, um, which means that there's no errors in the Bible, but I believe it's in the original languages, and I don't think that necessarily means that someone wouldn't spell her name differently. And especially it depends on, did they hear her name in Hebrew and then they just transliterated it into Greek and they transliterated it wrong, maybe, um, or maybe we don't have the manuscripts that have it right, and so we haven't found that yet. But in either case, there's a Rahab in his genealogy, and I believe it's this one. Um, I want you to realize, though, she was not an Israelite, but she was allowed to marry into the Israelite family because she became a spiritual Israelite. So again, it's not about race, and it's not about God being arbitrary. It's about God saying, you're following me, you're not. That's the way it's going to be. Now, for the rest of the conquering, God is with them, and God basically does all the work. There's a few times where Israel does fight. For example, this right here, where it shows someone who had sinned, because God had said, specifically with Jericho, and I think a few other places too, but He said to burn everything, don't take any spoils, um, don't keep anyone or any animals alive, except for Rahab, of course, that was the deal. Um, and various other things. And I'm sure that there could have been some people that, if they had decided to come to be an Israelite like Rahab did, then they would have been saved too. But the Bible didn't talk about that, you know. But we don't know all the details. The Bible's not going to give us all the details. So, but anyway, this gentleman named Achan or Achan, I think it's Achan. He took some stuff from Jericho, some spoils, some gold and silver, and he hid it in his tent. Well, then the Israelites go to fight Ai. Ai is how it's spelled. I think it's just pronounced I, which was a fairly decent sized city. And, you know, Joshua was told to only take a couple thousand up there, and well, they couldn't take it. They're like, well, what's going on? Then they realize, oh, Khan has taken some stuff, and we need to deal with him. And so, well, I'm trying to think how it came about. Somehow it came out that Khan had taken some stuff, and then they went and found it in his tent. They got him to confess, and then they dealt with him through stoning. I believe they did it to his family too. And then they were able to go and defeat Ai. Now there was another group of people called the Gibeonites, and they saw what was happening, and they got smart, and they said, let's go make a deal, but we're going to have to be a little cunning here. So they disguised themselves, the leaders of Gibeon, made themselves look like merchants, and they dressed down, and they came and said, we've heard about Yahweh, we've heard about you, and we're from a far off land, and we want to be safe, we want to have a treaty with you. And You know, Joshua should have asked God for his counsel. Should we do what these people are asking or not? But he didn't. It took a little convincing, but he gave in to their deception and he made a deal with them. He made a peace treaty with them, which in Deuteronomy 7 1 through 2, as you can see on the slide there, God had told them don't do that, but they did. So eventually it came out that these men they made a deal with were Gibeonites and were living in the land that Israel was conquering. Israel goes up and says, well, why did you deceive us? You live in our land. And they said, well, we didn't want to die, and we were sure if we told you who we were that you would kill us, and we didn't want that to happen. Um, so they say, okay, well, we're not gonna harm you, but you are going to be slaves in this land. You're going to be working for us, and that's basically what happened. Now later on, some other kingdoms actually went to attack Gibeon because they knew about the treaty and of course they were angry about that. Plus, Gibeon was a fairly large city, and they didn't want Gibeon teaming up with Israel to go attack them. So 5 different kings joined forces to attack Gibeon. Gibeon calls for help from the Israelites, and the Israelites go and help them because it's kind of part of the treaty, and the 2 fend off the 5. And that's where the later Joshua even saves them comes in. Now, there's no doubt that there were other events similar to Achan and the Gibeonites that took place. Um, I didn't read through as much as I would have liked to have. I did more skimming. Um, but it seems like there are some other stories like that took place. And even if there aren't, I'm sure that those are um, just examples of various other things that could have happened and probably did, as far as the Israelites not following God's command, which, they're human, we're human. Humans just have a hard time following God's commands at all. So, and that's myself included. I have a really hard time with that, especially on certain things. After this, the rest of the book of Joshua is really all about dividing up the land. And Moses had kind of told them um, how he had, you know, prescribed it, how it was going to happen. You can look on the map there, and you can see Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh have land on the east side there. That's east of the Jordan River. And then you have uh, Naphtali, Asher, Zebulun, Issachar, the other half of Manasseh, Ephraim, Dan, Benjamin, Judah, and Simeon, all on the west side of the Jordan. Now you may be wondering, well, where's Levi? Well, if you remember, um, I told you that Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, took over tribal leadership um, for Joseph and for Levi, because Levi, the tribe of Levi, was set apart by God to be his priests, his chosen, the special um, people, in that they were going to be serving him. Now, the Levites did get um, cities within the territories. They're kind of mixed into the territories. Um, I forget exactly how many cities they got. I think 20 some odd, 40 some odd. But basically, they would get a city, a few cities in the regions, and the farmland around those cities as their inheritance. And then those cities became safe cities. That is, if someone were to accidentally, or I guess even purposely, kill someone, they could run to this city, and if they got there before the Blood Avenger caught them, then they would be safe for a trial. There should have been a trial anyway, but you know because of the hardness of their hearts, that's just kind of how it worked out. But in order to be fair, you needed these cities to be somewhat close, and especially if it was an accident or if you were falsely accused, you really wanted to get to that city as quick as possible. So, um, that's basically the book of Joshua. Joshua does does eventually die, and obviously I don't think he wrote that part of Joshua because that is in Joshua as well. Um, may have been Samuel that wrote it. It may have been somebody else. I think Samuel comes along at least a generation or two after Joshua does. So from there we can jump into the book of Judges, though, which there's only one slide on here because it's basically all the same. And if you go to Southeast Christian Church, which is where I go, then you know a few of the stories because we're doing a series on old school superheroes. And let's see, Gideon, Deborah, and Samson are three of the judges mentioned in the book of Judges. And we've gone over their stories, as well as Elijah's story. Then there's going to be Rahab and Joshua and Moses. I'm guessing that's the order of the last three because they're kind of going backwards a little bit. Or actually, I guess they started with Elijah, then went to Gideon, then Deborah, then Samson. But now they're going to go backwards again, so who knows what order they're going to do. But basically, I kind of said this on the second slide as well, where I introduced the book of Judges. Basically, the Israelites turn from Yahweh because they're safe and happy, and they don't feel like they need Him, which to me sounds a lot like America. We don't say God save us or prayers or anything like that, not as a nation anyway, until something happens, like 9/11 or the various shootings that have been going on lately, which are all due to race, which is stupid. You know, yeah, we look different, but the color of our skin is based off of a chemical, you know, off of mostly melanin, the pigment melanin. There's a couple other pigments as well, but it's mostly based off the melanin. We're all brown. I'm not white. I'm a very, very, very pale tan, but I'm not white. And I have some friends that are very dark skinned, but they're not black. If you were to take a white piece of paper and put it next to me, you would see the difference. And if you would put a black piece of paper next to them, you'd see the difference. I'm extremely light tan. They're extremely dark brown. But we're all brown. And we all come from Noah and his sons and their wives, and eventually we all get back to Adam. So shooting on race is stupid. Anyway, so eventually the Israelites start getting attacked and oppressed by their neighbors. The Israelites cry out to Yahweh, and even though they don't deserve it, He helps them by raising up a judge, and then that person saves Israel. And again, they settle disputes, they make some decisions, they kind of lead for a while until they eventually die of old age or whatever. Samson actually dies in action, which I think I'll go over the story of Samson here in a little bit since we still have plenty of time. But so things settle down, and then the Israelites again turn from Yahweh and they start all over. Now, the whole point of Judges for me is that God is a just God, but He's also merciful. The Israelites start to fall away, and so He starts to let things happen, and then they cry out, and He helps them. And I think it's the same with us in Christ. Yes, Christ died for our sins, and so we don't have that that eternal separation from God anymore as a threatened punishment. Because when we accept Christ as our Lord and Savior, we are saved, we are washed, we are pure. However, we're not perfect, we still sin, and I do believe that God disciplines us in various ways. How He disciplines you is based off of you and what you're doing and what the circumstances are. Um, for example, I've been dealing with certain lustful issues, and that may very well be why I've been single for mostly single for the last 13 years now. And part of it's because I don't get out much either, but I do get out and I have asked girls out, and anyway, so I do think that there's still a disciplining effect on there. Now, as for Samson, I think Samson is a very good example of what some people do, and especially some Christians. Now, Samson, um, I believe he had the Nazarite vow, so uh, no grapes, no grape juice, no wine, none of that. Couldn't cut his hair, had to stay long. Now again, it's not these things that are giving him power. They're symbols, and they're showing that he's trusting God, and God is giving him his power. Samson has a soft spot for women, especially very pretty women. He also did certain things. He touched an animal carcass, which you're not supposed to do unless you just killed it yourself and you're preparing it for food. That's different. But this was a lion that he had just found out in the desert. It was dead. He shouldn't have touched it, but he did. Um, and anyway, he had a soft spot for women. There was this one beautiful Philistine woman, and he wanted her for a wife, and he told his parents to get her for him. And so they did. He married her. And then, um, the Philistines, of course, they know of his strength, and he's already defeated them a few times, and he's saving Israel like he's supposed to. But they want to get rid of him. Now they know who his wife is, and they tell her, um, go and get the secret of his strength for us, or we're gonna, do some stuff to you. We're gonna kill you and your family, etc., etc. Of course, she didn't really have any love for Samson anyway, so she asks him, and he plays a game with her. He says, "Well, get some 7 ropes and tie me up." And so while he's sleeping, she ties him up. I don't know how he could sleep through that, but he does. And then she says, "Samson, wake up! The Philistines are here!" And he burst out, and I'm trying to think. I don't know if the Philistines were actually there or if it was a test. Um, if they were there, he beats them, gets them out of his house. I don't think he necessarily kills them. But then she's like, "Well, why did you lie to me?" He says, "Okay, well, here's the real thing. Get 7 new bowstrings and tie me up, or new ropes and tie me up, tie my hair in knots and tie me up." And eventually, he finally gives in because she's bawling and, "Why do you not love me? Why do you hate me? Why?" Um, and he says, "Well, fine. It's my hair. If you cut off my hair, I will be weak." So again, while he's sleeping, she ties him up, shaves his head, says, "Samson, the Philistines are here," and then he can't break the ropes. Now again, his hair did not give him his strength. It was a symbol, and God was teaching him a lesson. A, don't play games, not those kind. B, don't tell people your secret to your strength, you know, unless it's something they can't take away from you. Like for me, it's my faith in Christ, and I'm sorry, you can't take that from me. You could beat the living tar out of me, but you cannot take that from me. Um, and so he's caught by the Philistines because they're definitely there that time. I know that for sure. And they make him a slave. They gouge out his eyes. He's set to pushing a millstone like a donkey normally would, you know. Um, and eventually, the Philistine leaders are going to throw this big party, and they invite thousands of people. I think there were 3,000 or so there that day. And they bring in Samson as some, entertainment. Oh, look at the blind Israelite, and yada. Um, Now, I think by this time, his hair would probably have grown back. He would probably be pretty strong from pushing that millstone around anyway. You know, the millstones are big and heavy, and they're not that easy to push. Um, but Samson has, oh, what do you want? A guy leading him around. I forget what the technical word for that is. Um, but he asks if they could take him to the pillars at the center of this building, which I believe it was a temple of sorts. And so, yeah, they go to the center pillars, and he's resting there. And of course, he's hearing all the carousing, and I'm sure he heard jeers at him and jokes and whatnot too. And, he prays to God. And I don't know the exact prayer that he was praying. I don't think it mentions him asking for forgiveness necessarily, but he does pray to Yahweh, and he does ask for his strength back for just one moment, just one more time to have his immense strength that he had. And then he starts pushing on the pillars, and they come tumbling down. The roof, which had people on it, caves in, and Samson died along with about 3,000 Philistines that day. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who has some sort of situation where they have to humble themselves before God and ask for something back is going to end up dying. No, of course not. That'd be silly. But I think the realization that without God, we are less than what we could be. Not that I mean, to a degree, we're broken, we're sinful. Not that we're useless, no, definitely not. We are definitely useful. Um, but we're even more useful with God, and it's amazing what He can do with us if we let Him. Even if we have stumbled and fallen and we're blind, we're surrounded by people mocking us, and we've made some terrible mistakes, possibly even idiotic mistakes like Samson made, God can still use us. And we'll see this with King David as well, um, which for next time, here in 2 weeks, we're going to be going over 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Now that seems like a large section of scripture, and it is. Um, Obviously, I'm not going to be going over everything in them, but there are a lot of key people and events in those that I can pick from. I will keep it down to an hour maximum. I'm guessing I'll probably talk about Samuel and Saul and David and Solomon in detail, or at least a decent amount of detail. And then after Solomon, I'll just sort of wrap it up and give you some highlights. Now, 1st and 2nd Samuel, I believe, was written by Samuel. We'll get into the introductions with that. So, and I'll say this, of course, in the introductions, but 1st and 2nd Chronicles is really just a rehashing of, I believe, Samuel and Kings both. Not putting everything in there, leaving some stuff out. But we'll get to that with the introductions next time. And I look forward to doing that, whether or not anyone's here. I like doing these. I'm learning a lot, and I hope that you are too. If you have any suggestions, if I need to slow down, speak up, if my PowerPoints can be better, if you think I missed something, if you have questions about something, let me know. And I don't expect you to be reading everything that I'm going over. I do have a PDF that I could send you that kind of gives me an outline of basic scriptures to use, that if you would just want to read those basic scriptures, you could, because like for this, all it said was the fall of Jericho, Joshua 6. Well, you could read Joshua 6. But then I went over all of Joshua and Judges and Ruth. Again, not in too great a detail, but I went through them. Um, but if you want to focus on those would be good scriptures to ask questions about if you have them. Um, Other than that, I'm out. God bless, and I will see you next time.